I don't shake hands with staff. The words sliced through the air like glass, sharp and cold, freezing the entire Nexlify boardroom into silence. Every executive at the long glass table stiffened, exchanging quick, nervous glances, while some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to study their notes. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, the hum of the air conditioner loud against the heavy quiet. Serena Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Ventures, stood perfectly still, her calm expression hiding the storm brewing beneath the surface. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe everyone deserves equal respect, like and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's begin. Serena Mitchell had walked into the towering glass headquarters of Nexlify Innovations that morning prepared, focused, and sharp. As the 42-year-old CEO managing over $75 billion in global assets, she was considering a $4 billion investment into Nexlify, one of the fastest-growing AI companies in the country. This was supposed to be a due diligence session, one of many she'd done this year. But from the very moment she entered the building, she sensed something was wrong. It started small, like it always does. At the reception desk, the young woman barely looked up, tapping away on her keyboard before glancing at Serena's visitor badge, without a smile, without so much as eye contact. She pointed Serena toward a cluster of gray chairs in the standard waiting area. Serena glanced toward the VIP lounge, 15 steps away, quiet behind frosted glass walls, where other investors sipped espresso and enjoyed soft leather seating. Her name was on that list, yet no invitation came. She said nothing. She simply sat down, crossed her legs, and pulled out her tablet. She was patient, but she was taking notes, because to Serena, small signs often revealed the bigger truth. 45 minutes passed. Not once did she complain. Not once did she fidget or glance at her watch. She reviewed her questions, memorized key figures, and planned every step of this meeting with surgical precision. To anyone else, this delay would feel like disrespect. To Serena, it was information. At last, a junior assistant appeared, calling her name without enthusiasm, gesturing toward the boardroom as though she were an applicant for an entry-level job. Serena rose gracefully, adjusted her navy blazer, and followed him down a long hallway lined with glass walls displaying Nexlify's awards, press clippings, and framed photos of their CEO posing with politicians. She noticed every detail, the missing diversity in those photos, the absence of women, the absence of people of color. She filed it away silently. Inside the boardroom, Ethan Caldwell, Nexlify's CEO, sat at the far end of a polished table surrounded by his all-white, all-male executive team. He didn't stand. He didn't extend his hand. "Serena," he said casually, leaning back in his chair as though greeting a junior consultant. Around him, his executives mirrored his body language. Smug smiles, lazy posture, and whispers passed behind folded hands. Serena placed her tablet on the table, clicked her pen, and met Ethan's gaze directly, her calm expression betraying nothing. Ethan began his presentation with a bright, animated slide of a cartoon rocket and confetti exploding behind it. "Our AI," he said slowly, "is changing the world." His tone carried the faint condescension of someone explaining technology to a beginner. "Machine learning," he added, "is teaching computers to think. In a way." He paused, expecting a nod, a smile, an acknowledgement of his brilliance. None came. Serena remained silent, jotting down the slide title, time-stamping her notes, and preparing her next question. "Which of these models are currently in production, and which are still in validation?" she asked, voice measured, professional, and precise. "And include the data lineage. I want to understand the audit trail for training sets." Ethan blinked, caught slightly off guard, then clicked to the next slide filled with buzzwords and stock photos. He spoke vaguely about proprietary workflows, accelerated iteration, and trade secrets. Serena let him finish, then followed with her next question. Your Q3 financials show a 28% drop in R&D spending despite claims of expansion. Where did the funds shift? The room grew still. Ethan shifted in his chair, forcing a smile. That level of detail might be complex, he said slowly, emphasizing the last word as if it were a subtle warning. We can circle back. Perhaps we should talk about your interest in diversity initiatives. Serena's pen moved smoothly across the page, noting not just his words, but the timing of his deflection. She kept her tone even. We will discuss culture, she replied calmly. But first, answer the financial question. At her words, one of the executives to Ethan's right, Jameson Holt, leaned toward a colleague and whispered, not quietly enough. How could she even keep up? A faint chuckle followed. Serena didn't react. Instead, she asked for Nexlify's employee retention rates, leadership diversity metrics, and median tenure by department. Ethan dodged again, pointing vaguely to the CTO, who mentioned a committee but offered no names, no minutes, no data. Another note for Serena. She glanced at her pen, clicked it closed, and folded her hands lightly on the table. Here is what matters, she said, her voice calm but unshakable. Culture leaves a trail. People leave when doors stay closed. We invest based on evidence, not slogans. She held Ethan's gaze for one deliberate beat longer before lowering her eyes back to her notes. The room shifted uncomfortably, executives adjusting in their chairs, the tension rising unspoken but undeniable. Serena had seen this before, the arrogance, the blind spots, the subtle signals that told her more than any slide ever could. She knew this meeting wasn't just about Nexlify's numbers. It was about testing values, testing leadership, testing culture. And she wasn't just taking notes for herself, she was building a record. What she didn't say, what no one in that room yet realized, was that the decisions made today would soon ripple through global markets. Serena Mitchell wasn't just an investor, she was a force. And Ethan Caldwell had just made the first, fatal mistake. Maybe we should keep this simple for you. The words slid out of Ethan Caldwell's mouth slowly, coated in condescension, punctuated by a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The room tensed, executives shifting slightly, some glancing at Serena Mitchell as though expecting her to react. But she didn't flinch. Her pen hovered above her notebook, poised, ready, steady. Ethan clicked to the next slide, a brightly colored graphic filled with cartoonish arrows and oversized icons, explaining how machine learning works as though addressing a classroom of high school students. Here at Nexlify, he said with exaggerated patience, we teach our systems to learn like children, simple patterns, basic inputs, and then, over time, the results just grow. He gestured with both hands, expecting admiration, but Serena's expression remained unreadable, her focus locked on the discrepancies she had already noticed. Jameson Holt, seated to Ethan's right, leaned slightly toward another executive and muttered under his breath. She probably doesn't get half of this anyway. A muffled chuckle followed, but Serena heard it, cataloged it, stored it alongside the receptionist's dismissive tone and the 45-minute delay she endured in the lobby. Every detail mattered. Every microaggression was data. Calmly, she raised her voice, low but firm, cutting through the soft laughter in the corner. Your R&D spend dropped 28% in Q3 while claiming expanded capabilities, she said evenly. Explain the discrepancy. Ethan, leaning back in his chair, waved a hand dismissively. That's a complex topic. Serena, he said, stressing her first name again without title, deliberately erasing the professional respect her position demanded. We'll have finance send you a breakdown later. For now, let's focus on the big picture, where Nexlify is headed, the vision, the opportunity. Serena clicked her pen once, slowly, deliberately, then rested it beside her notebook. I understand vision, she said softly, her voice controlled, layered with quiet strength. But numbers are evidence. Without evidence, vision is opinion. Silence settled around the table for a brief, weighted moment, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. Ethan's jaw tightened, his irritation thinly veiled now, but before he could respond, Jameson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished table. Look, he said casually, voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. We hire the best. We don't waste time slicing data by race or gender or labels. We focus on talent, not quotas. He reclined smugly, arms folded across his chest as though he had made an unassailable point. Serena didn't look at him. Instead, she turned her attention back to Ethan, steady and precise. Then provide the retention metrics, she said calmly. By department, by tenure, by leadership level. The CTO shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearing his throat before offering a vague answer about employee committees and internal assessments. No hard data, no transparency. Another signal Serena added to the growing list. Ethan leaned forward now, placing his hands flat on the table, adopting a tone that straddled authority and mock courtesy. Serena, we're building rockets here, he said slowly, choosing each word as though speaking to a subordinate. You're here to evaluate an opportunity, not manage our HR. The implication landed sharp and heavy, but Serena remained composed, breathing evenly, her gaze unwavering. Culture, she replied softly, is not HR. It's risk. Unmeasured risk destroys value. She didn't raise her voice, didn't match his edge, but the weight of her words silenced the soft murmurs across the table. One junior executive stopped fidgeting with his pen. Another set his tablet down slowly. Serena leaned back slightly in her chair, calm, collected, and perfectly still, the embodiment of control. Ethan, however, seemed to grow more agitated, tapping his fingers against the table, his confidence cracking beneath her unshakable composure. He clicked to the next slide, another glossy stock photo showing diverse employees laughing together around a laptop, a caption underneath declaring, Nexlify empowers everyone. Serena's eyes scanned the slide, then flicked back to Ethan. Who approves your culture audit reports? She asked suddenly, her voice cutting clean through the staged narrative on the screen. Which third-party firm validates them? Where are the independent findings published? Ethan hesitated, visibly thrown off by the precision of her questioning, before forcing a strained smile. Those reports aren't finalized yet, he said finally, sidestepping the substance entirely. Serena nodded once, slowly, deliberately, and wrote another note in neat, careful handwriting, no audit transparency. She remembered something her mentor once told her years ago on Wall Street, that the loudest leaders often hid the deepest cracks beneath the surface. She'd seen those cracks before. She recognized them now. Then, in an almost imperceptible shift, Ethan changed tactics, gesturing broadly toward a new slide showing Nexlify's projected $12 billion valuation in 18 months. This, he said proudly, is the opportunity before you. His voice softened now, smooth, confident, attempting charm. We're giving Mitchell Ventures a seat at the futures table. Serena, it's your choice if you want to claim it. Jameson smirked, leaning back again, arms folded, watching Serena closely as though waiting for a reaction. Waiting for her to be impressed or intimidated or both. But Serena remained silent, her expression neutral, her breathing even, her mind collecting every data point like chess moves 3 turns ahead. Finally, she spoke, voice low and deliberate. $4 billion, she said evenly. Only moves where culture aligns with accountability. She let the sentence hang, suspended in the heavy quiet that followed, then added, "Show me the numbers, Ethan, all of them." He said nothing. Instead, he clicked to another slide, a promotional reel this time, flashing bright videos of product launches, keynote stages, and executives shaking hands with politicians. Serena's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the images, noting the sameness of the faces on every stage, every podium, every celebration. No diversity, no representation, no inclusion, just another signal. She looked up again, her gaze sharp now, and asked the final question of the hour. How many women sit on Nexlify's leadership team? The silence that followed was different this time, heavily charged. Ethan hesitated, eyes darting briefly toward his CTO, then back at Serena. "1," he said finally. "But titles don't define influence." Serena made another note, her handwriting precise, steady, controlled. This wasn't frustration. This was documentation, evidence, a record of a system that revealed itself without ever realizing it, inside her mind. The picture had begun to take shape, the receptionist's dismissive glance, the 45-minute delay, the patronizing tone, the whispered jokes, the avoidance of accountability, the slogans without substance, and now, the casual erasure of representation at the top, piece by piece. Nexlify was telling her its story without saying a word, and Serena Mitchell listened, not with anger, not with pride, with purpose. The more they revealed, the clearer her next move became. Ethan didn't know it yet, but every insult, every evasion, every missing data point was building toward something he couldn't yet see, a storm already gathering beyond those glass walls. Serena adjusted the pen between her fingers, glanced briefly at her tablet, and clicked it off. The meeting wasn't over yet, but phase 1 was. The evidence was there. The signals were undeniable. Nexlify thought they were evaluating her. They didn't realize she was evaluating them, and the results, so far, were damning. "I don't shake hands with staff." The words landed like a grenade in the middle of the Nexlify boardroom, detonating in silence so thick it swallowed every sound. No one moved. No one breathed. Ethan Caldwell's voice still echoed faintly against the glass walls, his tone casual yet dripping with arrogance, as though Serena Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Ventures, one of the most powerful black-owned investment firms in the world, was nothing more than a low-level assistant who had wandered into the wrong room. For a split second, the entire table froze, executives glancing at one another without daring to meet Serena's eyes. Some looked down, ashamed. Others smirked, Jameson Holt included, leaning back in his chair with an expression of quiet satisfaction, as though this was the natural order of things being re-established. Serena didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply set her pen down, folded her hands neatly, and let the silence do its work. It was the kind of silence that unsettled the arrogant because they expect outrage, demand it, need it to feel control. But Serena offered none. Instead, she reached for her phone, tapped a single message, and sent it without hesitation. "Withdraw." The word glowed on the screen for a heartbeat before disappearing into a secure channel, instantly triggering a cascade of actions her team at Mitchell Ventures had been prepared for the moment she walked into this building. No one at Nexlify knew it yet, but within hours the financial landscape they depended on would shift beneath their feet. Without raising her voice, without breaking eye contact, Serena stood, excused herself politely, and walked out of the boardroom with unshakable calm. Down the corridor, She passed the frosted glass VIP lounge she had been denied earlier, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, a steady rhythm against the pounding chaos that had begun brewing inside her chest. She stopped outside the restroom, locked the door behind her, and finally allowed herself a single deep breath, not out of anger, but resolve. Pulling out her secure earpiece, she called Lila Carter, her CFO and most trusted ally. "Initiate Phase 1, Serena said, her voice steady, clipped, surgical. "Signal the analysts. Prep the full dossier. I recorded everything." On the other end, Lila didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. "Understood," she replied quietly. "It begins." Serena hung up, washed her hands slowly, deliberately, and stared into the mirror above the marble counter. Her reflection looked back at her with sharp, unwavering eyes, the same eyes that had once faced Wall Street boardrooms where she was mistaken for an assistant, the same eyes that had been dismissed, underestimated, and doubted every step of her rise. She remembered her first job interview out of Wharton, sitting across from a hiring manager who told her, without flinching, "You're not quite the fit for the clients we cater to." It wasn't her resume. It wasn't her grades. It wasn't her skill set. It was her face. And today, in this very building, it was happening again. Only this time, she didn't need their approval. They needed hers. She straightened her blazer, smoothed the creases on her sleeve, and returned to the boardroom. Not to finish the meeting, but to observe the collapse already beginning. When she stepped back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Executives were restless, phones buzzing quietly against the glossy table as traders and analysts began reacting to Mitchell Ventures' silent move. Ethan hadn't noticed yet, still too busy performing his carefully curated confidence. "As I was saying," he continued, gesturing toward a slide showing Nexlify's projected dominance over competitors. "Our AI platform is poised to redefine global standards." But across the room, one junior executive glanced down at his tablet, his eyes widening as a news alert flashed. "Mitchell Ventures signals divestment from Nexlify ahead of funding review." He swallowed hard, trying to hide the flicker of panic on his face. Serena caught it instantly, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. Ethan, oblivious, turned to Alan Whitaker, a wealthy white investor who had just entered the room unannounced. "Alan!" Ethan exclaimed, finally standing for the first time since Serena's arrival. He strode over, shook Alan's hand firmly, and offered him the prime seat at the center of the table, the seat Serena had been denied. The optics couldn't have been clearer. Serena remained seated, composed, and silent. Alan, unaware of the earlier insult, turned to greet her warmly, extending his hand across the table, before she could respond. Ethan stepped in, placing a hand on Alan's shoulder and chuckling dismissively. "Alan, no need," he said loudly, glancing at Serena with that same smug smile. "I don't shake hands with staff." This time, the silence wasn't passive. It was stunned, heavy, suffocating. A few executives stared at their notes. One coughed nervously. Jameson, seated directly opposite Serena, folded his arms and smirked again, enjoying the moment far too much. And still, Serena didn't react. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain who she was, didn't remind them that her signature could move billions in and out of their company within minutes. She didn't need to. The market would handle that for her. Beneath the table, her smartwatch buzzed softly, an encrypted update from Mitchell Ventures confirming that 3 of Nexlify's top 5 institutional investors had already been notified of the situation. The dominoes were falling, slowly, methodically. Serena reached for her pen again and began writing in her notebook, each stroke precise and deliberate, a ritual of control when chaos threatened to engulf the room. She wrote a single sentence and underlined it twice. Power is silent until it speaks. Ethan, misreading her composure as weakness, pressed harder. "Now, Serena," he said in a mock-friendly tone, leaning back in his chair. "If you'd like to discuss funding diversity programs, we can certainly find a way to partner on that. Optics matter these days. After all," there it was, the confirmation, not just disrespect, but weaponized tokenism. She glanced up at him, her gaze steady, controlled, a storm hidden behind glass. "I agree," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Optics do matter." She set the pen down again, closed her notebook, and folded her hands carefully on top of it. "I'll review your documents in full," she continued, her tone neutral but firm. "And Mitchell Ventures will make its decision based on evidence, not presentations." Ethan nodded, misinterpreting her restraint as acquiescence. But across the table, one executive, a younger engineer who had been silent the entire meeting, watched her closely, understanding what the others couldn't see. He'd seen the news alert. He'd connected the dots. He knew Ethan had just made a mistake that could cost Nexlify more than any lawsuit ever could. Serena stood, gathering her tablet, her notes, and her composure. She offered a polite nod to the room, turned, and walked toward the door without looking back. Behind her, whispers erupted in low, urgent tones, a ripple of unease spreading like heat across the glossy table. Jameson muttered something under his breath, but no one laughed this time. The power dynamics had shifted, though most in the room hadn't yet realized it. Outside the boardroom, Serena stepped into the quiet hallway, her phone buzzing again with another secure update. Phase 1 complete. Market signals activated. Analysts engaged. She exhaled slowly, her expression unchanged, her pace unhurried. For Serena Mitchell, this was no longer just a meeting. It was a turning point, not just for Nexlify, but for every company that believed inclusion was optional, every executive who thought arrogance was untouchable. Nexlify's downfall had already begun, and Ethan Caldwell had handed her every tool she needed to dismantle him, without ever raising her voice. The first domino fell less than 20 minutes after Serena Mitchell walked out of the Nexlify boardroom, silent and composed, leaving Ethan Caldwell smirking behind his glass walls, oblivious to the storm already forming outside. At precisely 11:42 a.m., a quiet notification pinged across encrypted investor networks. Mitchell Ventures has withdrawn its $4 billion allocation review for Nexlify Innovations. Within seconds, high-frequency traders picked up the signal, and by the time Ethan clicked to his next slide, Nexlify's stock price had already dipped 3.2%. He didn't notice at first. He was too busy basking in his imagined dominance, replaying the moment he'd dismissed Serena as staff, believing he had put her in her place. But across the table, one junior executive noticed the subtle buzz of his smartwatch, his pupils widening as he read the alert. He shifted in his seat, hiding his reaction. But Serena, who had returned briefly to retrieve a document she'd left behind, caught it instantly. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply glanced at him, calm and knowing, before walking out again without a sound. By noon, the ripple had begun turning into waves on X, formerly Twitter. The first posts appeared under the hashtag #NexlifyExposed, triggered by whispers from employees who had waited years for someone powerful enough to confront the company's hidden rot. "I was told to change my accent to sound more professional," one anonymous engineer wrote. Another shared, "Leadership meetings happen behind closed doors. There's only one woman in the room. We've been asking for change for years." By 12:30 p.m., screenshots of Serena's entrance into the building surfaced, taken by interns who recognized her instantly, calling her The black billionaire who doesn't play games. The thread exploded, hitting 1 million views within the hour. Ethan Caldwell still hadn't grasped what was happening. He was sitting in his office, a towering display of wealth and ego decorated with photographs of himself shaking hands with senators and CEOs. While Serena sat 3 blocks away at the top floor of Mitchell Ventures' Seattle headquarters, glass walls overlooking the city skyline, finalizing phase 2 of her strategy. Around her, Lila Carter, her CFO, laid out the documents Serena had requested weeks ago. Nexlify's financial inconsistencies, anonymous complaints from whistleblowers, and a private dossier compiled from public filings and employee testimonies. "It's worse than we thought," Lila said quietly, scrolling through a red-lined report showing the company's 28% drop in R&D spending hidden under inflated PR budgets. "They've been shifting funds into executive bonuses and lobbying." Serena skimmed the page, her expression unchanged, her mind already moving 3 steps ahead. "Send it," she said calmly. "All of it. Analysts, regulators, and top-tier investors. I want this on every desk by morning." Within an hour, the dossier reached 5 of the largest institutional funds holding Nexlify stock, representing nearly $60 billion in combined influence. Serena didn't need to threaten anyone. She didn't need to raise her voice. The facts would do the work for her. At 1:12 p.m., the second domino fell. CNBC broke the story. Mitchell Ventures signals red flag over Nexlify innovations. 4B review withdrawn amid culture concerns. The headline hit financial dashboards worldwide. Nexlify's stock dropped another 2.8% in less than 15 minutes, wiping out nearly $780 million in market cap before Ethan had even finished his lunch. Across social media, the story snowballed. Former employees began posting anonymous testimonials on LinkedIn, exposing discrimination, pay gaps, and stalled promotions. A viral clip emerged from a company all-hands meeting 6 months earlier where Ethan, on stage, laughed at a question about diversity hiring and called it optics-driven fluff. By 2:00 p.m., hashtag Nexlify exposed hit the hashtag one trending spot nationwide. Ethan's assistant rushed into his office, pale, holding a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, voice trembling slightly. Ethan took it, scrolling furiously through headlines and posts, his confidence unraveling with each swipe. "This is noise," he muttered under his breath, slamming the tablet onto his desk. "The market will stabilize." But it didn't. By 2:37 p.m., Nexlify's stock had fallen a full 7%, triggering automated trading halts on the NASDAQ. Behind closed doors, phone calls erupted between Nexlify's board members and outside counsel. Investors demanded answers. Some threatened lawsuits. Others hinted at orchestrating an emergency leadership vote. Ethan paced his office, chest tightening, sweat beading along his hairline, refusing to believe that Serena Mitchell, the woman he'd dismissed as staff, had just set into motion the unraveling of his empire. Meanwhile, back at Mitchell Ventures, Serena sat at the head of her glass-walled conference room, surrounded by a diverse team of analysts, attorneys, and strategists. "Phase 3, she said, her voice calm but carrying weight, "isn't about Nexlify anymore. This is about industry standards." She pointed to a slide projected on the wall behind her, showing a proposed framework for Mitchell Ventures' new investment protocols, transparent pay structures, third-party culture audits, employee equity metrics, and leadership diversity thresholds. "If they want our money," she said simply, "they prove they deserve it." Lila glanced up from her laptop. "What about Ethan?" Serena closed her notebook, her tone even and measured. "He'll handle himself, or the market will handle him." And the market was already speaking. At 3:15 p.m., Bloomberg broke an explosive piece titled "Nexlify's Culture Crisis," Leaked dossier raises discrimination claims. Inside were Serena's documented notes, the 45-minute lobby wait, the patronizing slides, the whispered insults, and the now infamous moment Ethan called her staff in front of a room full of executives and investors. Within 30 minutes, major funds representing $18 billion announced they were reviewing their stakes in Nexlify, citing reputational concerns. At 4:00 p.m., Ethan finally called an emergency executive meeting. His voice cracked as he tried to rally his team, insisting this was temporary market noise and accusing Mitchell Ventures of personal sabotage. But his words fell flat. Some executives avoided his gaze. Others stared silently at the screens displaying live stock data, where Nexlify had now dropped 9.4%, erasing nearly $2.7 billion in value in a single trading day. Across the city, inside Serena's office, her phone buzzed softly. An encrypted message from one of Nexlify's internal engineers lit up the screen. "Thank you. We've been waiting for this." Serena read it, set the phone down, and allowed herself the smallest exhale. Not relief, not triumph, just focus sharpening into clarity. For her, this wasn't about revenge, it was about correction, accountability, and reshaping the systems she once fought so hard to enter. But for Ethan Caldwell, reality was finally crashing through the glass walls of his empire. By 5:00 p.m., the third domino fell. Reuters confirmed the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, had launched a preliminary investigation into Nexlify's hiring practices, prompted by whistleblower complaints triggered by Serena's dossier. Ethan's phone lit up with messages from board members, shareholders, and attorneys. He ignored most of them, his hands trembling slightly as he refreshed the stock chart over and over, watching red bleed down the screen. In less than 6 hours, Serena Mitchell had done more damage to Nexlify than any competitor could have managed in 6 years. And she hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't threatened. She had simply walked into their building, listened, documented, and moved the market with surgical precision. As the sun dipped below the Seattle skyline and Nexlify's glass headquarters reflected streaks of fading orange, Ethan finally sat alone in his office, the muffled sounds of frantic calls echoing down the hallway. He leaned back in his leather chair, loosened his tie, and stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths across town. Serena watched the same sunset from the top floor of Mitchell Ventures, her reflection glowing faintly against the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "Phase 1 complete." And she knew. For Ethan Caldwell, the worst was yet to come. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the financial world was already on fire. At 7:15 a.m., the opening bell hadn't even rung, and Nexlify Innovations was already trending worldwide. Overnight, investor forums lit up with heated debates, while screenshots of Serena Mitchell's dossier spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines dominated every major outlet. Nexlify in crisis, 4B funding withdrawn amid culture scandal. Hashtag Nexlify exposed sparks employee revolt. And Mitchell Ventures demands accountability across tech. At 8:00 a.m., Serena stood at the center of her glass-walled conference room at Mitchell Ventures headquarters in Seattle, her team gathered tightly around her. On the screens behind her were 3 charts: Nexlify's collapsing stock price, the surging volume of social media activity, and a growing list of institutional investors who had paused, reduced, or begun divesting their holdings. "This isn't just about Nexlify anymore," she said calmly, her voice steady, deliberate. "This is about rewriting the rules." Lila Carter, her CFO, nodded while pulling up the latest numbers. "We're at 11.2% down in pre-market trading," she reported. That's roughly $3.4 billion wiped overnight, and now Blackwell Capital, Horizon Equity, and Atlas Partners have joined us. That's another $22 billion in collective holdings under review. Serena didn't react outwardly, but inside she recognized the weight of the moment. This wasn't a battle anymore, it was a reckoning. Across the city, at Nexlify's glass and steel headquarters, the scene was chaos. Ethan Caldwell stormed into the executive war room at 8:17 a.m., his tie loose, his jaw tight, his voice hoarse from a night without sleep. On the table were printed screenshots of employee posts flooding LinkedIn and X, stories of microaggressions, ignored promotions, gagged complaints, and outright harassment, all surfacing under the viral hashtag NexlifyExposed, which had crossed 12 million mentions overnight. "This is coordinated," Ethan barked, slamming his palm against the table. "Mitchell Ventures is manipulating the market." But the CTO, pale and exhausted, shook his head slowly. "It's not just them," he said quietly. "The employees are driving this now, and investors are listening." At 9:30 a.m., the opening bell rang on Wall Street, and within minutes, Nexlify's stock tanked another 7%, triggering a temporary halt. Analysts scrambled to make sense of the collapse on live TV. CNBC anchors citing Serena Mitchell's dossier as the catalyst, calling her the most powerful voice in corporate accountability today. Forbes published an investigative feature mid-morning, revealing 3 previously buried lawsuits against Ethan Caldwell for gender and racial discrimination during his tenure at previous companies. The dam had broken, and there was no going back. Inside Mitchell Ventures, Serena leaned back in her chair, her hands folded neatly on the table. "We've documented a pattern," she said softly, her voice even, controlled, lethal in its precision. "And the market is responding. Now we move forward." Lila slid a printed report across the table, a 46-page investigative summary compiled overnight by Mitchell Ventures' legal and compliance teams. It detailed not only Nexlify's culture issues, but also its internal pay disparities, lack of promotion pipelines, and email trails that exposed deliberate suppression of diversity hires under Ethan's leadership. Serena glanced at the top page, then set it aside. "Send this to the EEOC, SEC, and every institutional partner with over $100 million exposure to Nexlify," she instructed, her tone surgical. "No opinion, just facts." At 10:15 a.m., the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission formally announced the opening of a full-scale investigation into Nexlify's workplace practices. By 10:30 a.m., Bloomberg reported that 4 of Nexlify's top 10 investors had requested an emergency shareholder vote to evaluate leadership restructuring options. Ethan Caldwell's phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from board members demanding answers, reporters asking for statements, attorneys offering advice he didn't want to hear. Inside his corner office, Ethan paced furiously, staring at the plunging stock chart on his screen, his reflection in the glass growing smaller and more desperate with each passing minute. By 11 o'clock a.m., the inevitable arrived. An emergency board meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock p.m. sharp. The email was blunt and cold. "All executive leaders required. Prepare for governance review. Attendance mandatory." Ethan tossed his phone onto the desk, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his unraveling empire bore down. Meanwhile, Serena and her team prepared for their next move, in the heart of her headquarters. She walked to the window overlooking downtown Seattle, the city alive beneath her, and thought of Harlem, where she grew up. She remembered sitting in her mother's kitchen as a teenager, hearing her whisper, "They'll underestimate you until they can't anymore." Those words echoed now, louder than ever, as she turned back to her team. "We're not here to destroy Nexlify," she said softly. "We're here to change what companies believe they can get away with." Lila nodded and opened a new slide on the screen behind her, titled Mitchell standards. It was bold, simple, uncompromising. 1. Independent culture audits required. 2. Transparent pay bands across all levels. 3. Minimum 40% representation targets in leadership. 4. Whistleblower protections enforced and funded. 5. Annual accountability reports published publicly. Serena turned to the room, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "From this point forward," she said, "no company gets our funding without meeting these benchmarks." Applause rippled softly around the table, but Serena raised her hand, quieting the room. "This isn't celebration," she reminded them. "This is responsibility." Back at Nexlify, the executive floor had descended into panic. Jameson Holt sat at the edge of the table, silent now, his earlier smirk long gone. Scrolling through live comments from thousands of employees demanding Ethan's resignation, some of the posts were brutal, personal, detailed, accusations of favoritism, retaliatory firings, and ignored harassment claims that now flooded public feeds. HR inboxes overflowed. Anonymous tips poured into journalists' hands. Nexlify wasn't just bleeding value. It was hemorrhaging credibility. At 1:30 p.m., CNBC aired a leaked video clip from yesterday's meeting. Ethan Caldwell dismissing Serena as staff in front of Alan Whitaker and Nexlify's leadership team. The clip, only 14 seconds long, racked up 4.8 million views in under an hour. By 2:00 p.m., as Ethan stepped into the boardroom for the emergency session, Nexlify's stock was down 11.7%, wiping $5.2 billion in shareholder value in less than 24 hours. The boardroom was ice cold, the silence oppressive as Ethan took his seat at the far end of the table. At the head sat Richard Kim, the lead independent director, his expression carved from stone. "Ethan," Richard said flatly, "the shareholders have lost confidence. We're here to discuss succession." Ethan tried to defend himself, his voice rising, his arguments frantic, but the board had already made up its mind. They reviewed Serena's dossier in full, detailing pay gaps, promotion failures, leaked internal memos, and the mounting regulatory investigations. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, damning. Ethan's allies on the board looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes as the votes began. By 3:00 p.m., the decision was final. Ethan Caldwell was stripped of his authority pending full removal as CEO. Outside, the news broke instantly, dominating headlines, while employees erupted online with relief, anger, and hope all at once. Serena, back at Mitchell Ventures, received the update via encrypted message, glanced at her screen, and nodded quietly to herself. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't call the press. Instead, she stood by the window, hands clasped, and whispered under her breath, "Accountability, not vengeance." By evening, the story had consumed global media. #NexlifyExposed had surpassed 25 million mentions. The EEOC had escalated its investigation, and 4 additional tech companies preemptively announced new diversity and inclusion initiatives to avoid similar scrutiny. Serena's name trended worldwide alongside words like reform, equity, and power. But inside her office, she simply gathered her notes, handed her team the next agenda, and prepared for the summit ahead. Because this wasn't the end of the fight. This was the beginning of an industry-wide transformation, one billionaire decision at a time, at exactly 9:00 a.m. the next morning. The glass-walled boardroom at Mitchell Ventures was silent, the air charged with tension as the city skyline stretched across the horizon behind Serena Mitchell's chair at the head of the table. Around her sat representatives from 5 of the largest institutional funds in the world, controlling more than $250 billion in combined assets, alongside Lila Carter, her CFO, and a team of senior analysts, attorneys, and compliance officers. They were here for one reason: the final confrontation with Nexlify Innovations. Serena sat perfectly still, composed, her posture regal yet relaxed, her dark blazer sharp against the natural morning light pouring into the room. She didn't check her watch. She didn't need to. She knew Ethan Caldwell would arrive late, right on cue. At 9:17 a.m., the door opened, and Ethan stepped inside, his usually immaculate appearance slightly frayed, tie loosened, jaw tight, dark circles under his eyes. Beside him was his attorney, clutching a thick leather folder, and Jameson Holt trailing close behind, his earlier arrogance now masked under forced composure. No one greeted them. No one offered handshakes. Ethan glanced around the table, pausing briefly at Serena, but she didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she calmly closed the notebook in front of her and folded her hands atop it, waiting for him to sit, without a word. Ethan lowered himself into the lone empty chair across from her, his body angled defensively, as though preparing for battle. Serena spoke first, her voice low, steady, and cutting through the silence like glass. "This meeting," she began, "is to review findings from our independent assessment of Nexlify's leadership practices, financial disclosures, and regulatory risks." She paused deliberately, letting each word settle. "We'll present the data. You'll have the opportunity to respond. No interruptions." Ethan started to speak, but his attorney placed a discreet hand on his arm, stopping him mid-breath. Lila pressed a button, and the wall-sized screen behind Serena illuminated with the first page of the Mitchell Ventures dossier. A 74-page document compiled from months of research, whistleblower testimony, and internal Nexlify communications. The title was simple and stark: Cultural Risk and Systemic Bias Assessment, Nexlify Innovations. Serena leaned back slightly, her voice calm, methodical, almost surgical as she began. "We found significant discrepancies between Nexlify's public statements and its internal realities. Let's start with compensation." With a click, the screen shifted to a chart showing 3 colored bars, one for men, one for women, one for employees of color. "Nexlify's median pay gap between men and women stands at 18.4%, she said. Among employees of color, it rises to 23.7%. These gaps persist across every level, including engineering, research, and leadership." Ethan shifted in his seat, muttering, "That's misleading." But Serena continued without breaking pace, her tone unflinching. "These figures come directly from Nexlify's own payroll records, verified by independent auditors." Jameson opened his mouth to interject, but one glance from Serena, sharp, unyielding, froze him instantly. The next slide appeared, promotion metrics over the last 5 years. "Out of 241 leadership promotions, only 3% went to employees of color," Serena said evenly. "Among women, the number is just 7%. Meanwhile, internal emails obtained from your executive committee describe diversity hiring targets as, quote, optics-driven fluff." A murmur rippled through the investor representatives seated around the table. One of them, Richard Alvarez of Horizon Equity, leaned forward, folding his hands tightly. "This isn't just bad optics. Ethan," he said coldly, "this is institutional liability." Ethan clenched his jaw, his attorney whispering urgently into his ear. But Serena didn't pause. She clicked again, and the next slide displayed a series of quotes, anonymous testimonies from Nexlify employees, their words raw and unfiltered. "I was told to soften my accent if I wanted client-facing work. My manager laughed when I asked about a promotion pipeline for women. They made me sign an NDA after I filed a discrimination complaint." Serena's gaze swept slowly across the table, landing squarely on Ethan. 18 employees, past and present, corroborated these accounts, she said. 4 of them filed formal complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, 3 of which are now under active investigation. Ethan slammed his palm against the table suddenly, the sound loud in the quiet room. "This is a coordinated attack," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of frustration and fear. "You're weaponizing isolated incidents to manipulate the market." Serena didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she pressed another button, and a video clip played on the massive screen behind her. A high-definition recording of Ethan in the Nexlify boardroom just 2 days prior, chuckling as he dismissed Serena publicly in front of Alan Whitaker and his executive team. "I don't shake hands with staff." The moment hung in the air, heavy and damning, silence folding over itself like a storm cloud. Ethan's attorney closed his eyes slowly, his shoulders sagging. Jameson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk long gone. One of the investor representatives leaned back, exhaling sharply as the tension crested. "That," Serena said quietly, "is not an isolated incident. That is leadership." The words landed like steel, final and absolute. Ethan's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Across the table, Serena slid a thick, leather-bound folder toward him. "Contained here," she said evenly, "are the independent findings we've shared with the SEC, the EEOC, and the institutional investors whose capital supports Nexlify's operations." She paused, letting the weight of that statement linger. "This is not about punishment. This is about accountability," Lila interjected softly, her tone factual, steady. "As of this morning, 4 of your top 7 institutional investors have placed their holdings under formal review, representing $26.4 billion in combined exposure. 2 have already filed notices demanding leadership restructuring before any future funding." Ethan looked around the table desperately, seeking support, but no one met his gaze. Not one. The boardroom was quiet except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Finally, Serena leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the table, her voice soft but unyielding. "You have 2 options," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You announce a comprehensive reform plan within 30 days, starting with independent audits, transparent pay disclosures, and leadership restructuring, or—" She let the word hang in the air, deliberate, pointed. "Mitchell Ventures, Horizon Equity, Atlas Partners, and every other fund represented in this room will coordinate a full institutional boycott. And Ethan, you know as well as I do, Nexlify won't survive it." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight, his chest rising and falling unevenly as the reality settled around him like a tightening vice. For the first time since he'd walked into the room, his confidence faltered, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for a glass of water and missed, the tumbler tipping, spilling cold liquid across polished wood. No one moved to help him. The silence was answer enough. Serena sat back slowly, folding her hands in her lap, her gaze steady, unwavering, impenetrable. She had spoken less than 500 words since the meeting began. Yet she'd dismantled years of unchecked power in a single, unbroken sequence of facts, evidence, and resolve. Ethan Caldwell looked smaller now, diminished somehow beneath the weight of his own decisions, his empire unraveling strand by strand in real time. After a long pause, Serena stood, adjusting the sleeve of her blazer, signaling the meeting's end. "The next move," she said softly, "is yours." And with that, she turned, her heels clicking against the polished floor, walking out of the glass-walled boardroom into the morning light beyond, behind her. The murmurs began, quiet but urgent, investor voices rising as they debated strategy, liability, and restructuring timelines. Ethan remained seated, staring blankly at the folder in front of him, knowing that for the first time in his career, Control had slipped entirely from his hands. Serena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The market would finish what she'd started. By the following week, the world had changed. Headlines everywhere screamed the same message in bold, unmissable letters. Ethan Caldwell ousted as CEO amid #NextLify exposed scandal, and Serena Mitchell reshapes tech investment standards forever. At 9 o'clock a.m. sharp on Monday, NextLify Innovations Board held a closed-door session that lasted just 47 minutes, a meeting that sealed the fate of its once untouchable leader. The vote was unanimous. Ethan Caldwell was removed as CEO, stripped of all authority, and barred from holding executive leadership positions in any publicly traded company for the next 10 years. There was no applause, no ceremony, just a quiet acknowledgement that unchecked arrogance had collided headfirst with accountability, and lost, across Seattle, inside the glass-walled headquarters of Mitchell Ventures. Serena Mitchell stood by the window overlooking the city, the morning sunlight painting soft gold across her navy blazer. Her phone buzzed gently in her hand with the official confirmation from NextLify's board. But she didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. Instead, she exhaled slowly, grounding herself in the reality of what this moment meant, not just for her, but for every underrepresented founder, every overlooked employee, every professional dismissed in boardrooms like the one where she'd been called staff. On the top floor below her, a press conference unfolded live, streamed worldwide to more than 12.4 million viewers. The new interim CEO, Dr. Aisha Khan, stood behind NextLify's podium, a South Asian data scientist who had once been sidelined, ignored, and dismissed in meetings where her expertise was undermined by men like Ethan. Today, she spoke with quiet authority and unshakable confidence. "This company," Aisha began, "cannot innovate if it excludes voices. We cannot lead if we ignore talent. We cannot grow if we fail to recognize every person's worth." Behind her, a new leadership team was introduced, diverse, inclusive, and deliberate in its design. For the first time in NextLify's history, women and people of color occupied more than 50% of executive roles. This wasn't a gesture. This was structural change. Serena watched the live stream from her office, her arms crossed lightly, her expression calm but proud as Aisha outlined sweeping reforms, bias-free hiring practices, transparent pay scales, independent culture audits, and mentorship programs for underrepresented employees. NextLify's internal whistleblower policies were overhauled, NDAs removed, and funding allocated to diversity programs that actually delivered measurable outcomes. Investors responded immediately. Within 48 hours, NextLify's stock, after plummeting nearly 17% at the height of the scandal, began stabilizing. Institutional partners who had paused their stakes announced conditional re-entry based on the reforms being implemented. Serena received personal calls from 3 major funds representing a combined $60 billion, thanking her not for destroying NextLify, but for forcing it to change. Yet, Serena knew this moment was bigger than a single company. That afternoon, she stepped onto the stage of the Global Investment Summit in San Francisco, where more than 4,000 institutional investors, entrepreneurs, and policymakers gathered under one roof to discuss the future of corporate governance. As Serena approached the podium, the room fell silent. Cameras flashed. Live stream counters surged past 18 million viewers. She placed her hands gently on either side of the microphone and spoke with clarity, her voice measured and steady. "This isn't about punishing companies," she said, her gaze sweeping the vast hall. "This is about protecting the future we're building together. Accountability is not a threat, it's an opportunity." She paused, letting the words breathe, letting them land. "From this day forward," she continued, Mitchell Ventures will require every company seeking funding to undergo an independent culture audit, disclose transparent pay bands, publish promotion pipelines, and demonstrate measurable equity in leadership representation. If you cannot meet these standards, her voice firmed, unwavering, you will not receive our capital, and neither will you receive the support of the $250 billion in investment power represented here today. A ripple moved through the crowd. Then applause erupted, rolling like thunder across the summit floor. For the first time, companies across industries were being publicly held to a single, unified benchmark of equity and inclusion. Later that evening, Serena announced the creation of the Mitchell Equity Fund, a $12 billion commitment dedicated to supporting underrepresented founders, women-led startups, and companies building transparent, inclusive systems. Access, she said simply, is power, and power must open doors, not close them. Applications flooded the fund within hours, from Black female AI researchers in Atlanta to Latino biotech innovators in Houston to indigenous renewable energy founders in Arizona. Serena knew this was only the beginning. Across the media, Serena's actions ignited global conversations about systemic inequity and corporate accountability. Editorials called her the quiet architect of reform and the investor rewriting Silicon Valley's rules. In an interview with CNBC, she said calmly, "Money has influence, but values decide where money goes. If we want innovation that truly serves society, we must decide who and what we're building it for." Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell retreated from public view entirely. Within weeks, Forbes published an exposé revealing years of toxic leadership patterns under his tenure, from buried harassment settlements to exorbitant executive bonuses paid while cutting diversity budgets. His name became synonymous with corporate arrogance, a cautionary tale taught in MBA programs and leadership seminars across the country. But Serena didn't speak his name again. She had never been in this for revenge, only transformation, back at Nexlify. Dr. Aisha Khan's leadership began reshaping the company's DNA from the inside out. In less than 6 months, employee retention rates improved 32%, and an internal survey showed 88% of employees now believed their voices mattered, a figure that had once been below 20%. Nexlify also partnered with historically Black colleges, women in tech organizations, and STEM mentorship programs nationwide to expand pipelines for underrepresented talent. For the first time in years, the company became a symbol of redemption rather than exclusion. Months later, Serena sat alone in her office, the Seattle skyline glowing softly in the dusk outside her window. On the wall beside her hung a painting by a young Black artist whose career Mitchell Ventures had funded. Vibrant strokes of gold and deep blue layered with meaning. Her phone buzzed with a simple email from Aisha. "Thank you for creating a space where people like me can lead." Serena smiled faintly, setting the phone down as her reflection caught in the glass, framed by the city she now helped shape. She thought of the boardroom where Ethan called her staff, the smirks, the dismissive tones, the delays, the walls that had been built around power and opportunity. And she thought of every hand that had been denied, every voice unheard, every potential overlooked. Those walls had cracked. Some had already fallen. She knew there would be resistance ahead, but the blueprint was written now, the standard set. Across the tech industry, 15 of the top 20 firms announced new investment standards modeled after Mitchell Ventures, requiring culture audits and equity metrics as preconditions for funding within a year. Studies showed a 22% increase in diverse leadership roles across funded companies and a measurable closing of pay gaps. For Serena, the numbers mattered, but the stories mattered more. Stories of engineers promoted for the first time in a decade. Stories of women leading AI divisions previously dominated by men. Stories of young founders, once overlooked, now thriving because someone dared to hold the system accountable. as night settled over Seattle. Serena stood by her office window, looking out at the city lights reflecting against the water. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, allowing herself the quiet satisfaction of knowing this wasn't the end. It was the foundation. Power had shifted. Expectations had changed. And as she whispered softly into the silence of her office, almost to herself, the words carried like a promise. This is just the beginning. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please subscribe, give it a like, and share it so more people can hear it. Your support means everything.